There is a room most people never enter. Not because they lack intelligence. Not because they lack courage. But because they were never given the map. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469, the son of a lawyer, a man of letters, a servant of the Florentine Republic for 14 years. He negotiated with kings. He sat across from Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men alive. He watched empires fall not because of armies, but because of assumptions. Innocent assumptions. Dangerous ones. When he was thrown into prison in 1512, tortured, stripped of everything, he did not write poetry. He did not write prayers. He sat in the silence of his exile and wrote the most unflinching diagnosis of human power ever committed to paper, The Prince. And here is what most people miss: Machiavelli was not celebrating cruelty. He was warning against naivety. He once wrote something that most people read and walk past without understanding its full weight. The gap between how one lives and how one ought to live is so great that whoever abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his destruction rather than his preservation. Let that settle. He was not saying abandon your values. He was saying, stop using a map designed for a world that does not exist. Because the people who play dirty against you, they are not operating on ideals. They are operating on incentives, leverage, and timing. And while you are trying to be fair, they are trying to be positioned. This video is not going to teach you how to become them. It is going to teach you something far more dangerous to those who wish you harm: how to see them clearly, move quietly, and become mentally unreachable. 7 principles. Drawn from the deepest roots of Machiavellian thought, not the surface-level quotes, but the architecture beneath them. If you are ready, drop in the comments right now. I see the board, not just the pieces. Let us begin. Principle 1. Read the architecture, not the performance. Machiavelli observed something in his years of diplomacy that most people spend their entire lives failing to grasp: human beings have 2 layers. The performance layer and the structural layer. The performance layer is what people say. The smiles. The reassurances. The expressed intentions. The carefully chosen words. Most of us spend enormous energy decoding this layer, trying to read tone, measure sincerity, decide if someone means well. But Machiavelli operated on the structural layer. He asked one question that cuts through performance like a blade through fog. What does this person's situation actually reward? In The Prince, he dissected the Italian princes of his time not by their speeches but by their structural position. Where did their power flow from? What did they stand to gain if circumstances moved in a certain direction? What did they lose if things shifted? This is the lens. Not what someone says. Not even what they believe. But what their situation structurally rewards. Here is a concrete example. When someone manipulates you through information, withholding what you need, sharing what confuses you, they rarely announce it. They say they forgot. They say it was unclear. They say they assumed you knew. The performance sounds reasonable. But the structure tells you everything. If the confusion always benefits them, you are not dealing with carelessness. You are dealing with architecture. Dirty players do not build their advantage through singular dramatic moves. They build it through consistent small positions, each one individually defensible, collectively devastating. Machiavelli wrote in the Discourses on Livy that great accidents, the fall of cities, the ruin of men, rarely arrive as sudden catastrophes. They arrive as a slow accumulation of small misreadings, each one seeming harmless at the time. This is the first thing you must train your eye to see. Not isolated incidents. Patterns. Not what happened once. What happens consistently whenever conditions change. When you stop reading the performance and start reading the architecture, you stop being surprised. You stop feeling personally wounded. You begin to feel informed. And information is the beginning of all power. Principle 2. Silence is not absence. It is a weapon. In chapter 18 of The Prince, Machiavelli describes 2 modes of operating in the world: the force of the lion and the cunning of the fox. Most people understand the lion. They respect visible strength, loud resistance, direct confrontation. But Machiavelli saved his deepest respect for the fox. Because the fox does not announce movement. The fox does not explain strategy. The fox lets others fill the silence with their own assumptions, and those assumptions almost always reveal far more than any interrogation could. Here is a truth that most people are never taught: when you rush to speak, to explain, to clarify, to defend. You are doing the work for your opponent. You are providing the map of your interior. You are showing exactly where pressure works, where desire lives, where fear hides. Dirty players do not need to ask you where you are vulnerable. They just need to create a moment of tension and wait. Your response will tell them everything. Machiavelli himself survived in one of the most politically lethal environments in European history, Renaissance Florence, where today's ally was tomorrow's executioner, and he did so partly through the strategic management of what he revealed and when. In the Discourses, he writes about the Roman Senate's use of calculated silence in negotiations, allowing adversaries to speak themselves into positions they could not retreat from, while Rome committed to nothing prematurely. This is the second principle. Before you respond, pause. Not out of confusion. Out of strategy. Let the silence expand. Watch what happens in that space. Do they grow anxious? Do they rush to fill it? Do they over-explain? Do they shift position? A manipulator's greatest asset is your urgency to resolve tension. Take that asset away and watch what happens. The pressure they were directing toward you turns inward. Their own discomfort begins to work against them. Silence, used with intention, is not emptiness. It is pressure of the most refined kind. It creates space for the other person to show you exactly who they are without ever being asked. You do not need to expose them. You only need to create the conditions under which they expose themselves. Principle 3. Master what Machiavelli called necessità. There is a concept at the very core of Machiavellian thought that most modern interpretations strip out, and without it, nothing else he wrote makes full sense. He called it necessità. Necessity. Not in the ordinary sense of desperation or urgency, but in a far more sophisticated sense, the practice of letting reality define the terms of engagement rather than ideology, emotion, or social expectation. Machiavelli watched brilliant men lose everything because they refused to act on what was actually happening in favor of what they believed should be happening. They operated according to the world as it ought to be while their enemies operated according to the world as it is. Necessità is the discipline of seeing clearly and acting accordingly, not what you want to be true, not what would be fair, not what you were promised. What is actually true right now? When someone is playing dirty against you, one of the most damaging things you can do is operate on the assumption that things will naturally correct themselves. That fairness will assert itself. That the relationship will find its own level. That time will sort it out. It will not. In the Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli studied the fall of Rome's republican institutions and traced many of its early crises to this exact failure. The refusal to acknowledge what was actually happening until the window for correction had closed. He wrote that men willingly deceive themselves about unpleasant realities, and that this self-deception is not weakness of character but a deeply human tendency, which is precisely why recognizing it is such a profound act of strength. Necessità means this: the moment you see clearly that something is wrong, you stop waiting for confirmation. You stop looking for the benefit of the doubt. You begin moving based on what is, not what you hope for. This is not cynicism. Cynicism is a permanent posture. Necessità is a responsive clarity. It is the ability to see without the fog of what you want to be true, and to move from that clear sight without drama, without announcement, without permission. When you master this, something extraordinary happens. You stop being late. Every situation that used to ambush you now arrives already understood. Because you stop delaying the moment of recognition. Principle 4. Guard the interior fortress. In Book 2 of the Discourses, Machiavelli examines a question that has enormous personal implications even though he frames it politically, the question of fortresses. At the time, rulers across Italy were building elaborate stone fortresses inside their own cities as protection against rebellion. Machiavelli studied these strategies and arrived at a conclusion that shocked conventional military thinking. The most important fortress is not the one built of stone. It is the one that exists in the minds of the people, and most critically, in the mind of the ruler himself. A prince who fears his people enough to build stone walls between himself and them has already lost the interior fortress. The outward structure is merely evidence of an inward collapse. Apply this to your personal life and the lesson becomes devastatingly clear. The most effective thing dirty players do against you is not done to your reputation, your resources, or your position. It is done to your interior, your self-perception, your sense of what you deserve, your interpretation of your own history. They work to colonize the inside. The persistent low-level undermining. The reframing of your strengths as flaws. The manufactured doubt. The slow erosion of your confidence in your own perception. Machiavelli understood that no external strategy succeeds against an enemy that has already won the interior battle. The interior fortress is protected not through emotional suppression, not through pretending you are unaffected, but through something far more powerful, consistent private clarity. The ability to return, alone, to what you actually see, what you actually experienced, what you actually know. When you have this, when your internal reference point is stable, external manipulation slides off. Not because you are armored against feeling, but because your feelings do not become your truth factory. You can be hurt and still see clearly. You can be unsettled and still act precisely. The interior fortress is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to let feeling become your lens for reality. Protect the inside. Because the person who cannot be destabilized internally cannot ultimately be defeated externally. Principle 5. Control time. Never let urgency be manufactured. Machiavelli wrote something in The Prince that most readers glide past as simple political advice, but which contains one of the most personally applicable truths he ever committed to paper. A prince must be a judge of time. Not a manager of time, a judge of it. The distinction is essential. Dirty players manufacture urgency. This is among their most reliable and most damaging techniques. They create artificial deadlines, invent false windows of opportunity, apply social pressure that gives the impression a decision must be made now. Why? Because urgency destroys your strategic range. When you believe you must decide in the next 5 minutes, you do not have access to the full board. You only see the immediate situation, exactly the narrow view they have engineered for you. Machiavelli studied this technique in Cesare Borgia, a man widely feared for his capacity to wait. Borgia did not chase. He positioned. He allowed opponents to grow anxious, to overreach, to reveal their strategies through impatience, while he sat in the geometric center of his own patience like a stone in moving water. In the Discourses, Machiavelli identifies urgency as one of the primary mechanisms through which capable people are defeated. Not by superior force but by pressure that shortens their timeline until their options collapse. The counter-strategy is radical but simple: refuse to recognize manufactured urgency as real urgency. Real urgency is objective. A building is on fire. A genuine deadline exists. There is no possibility of extension. Real urgency has material consequences if unaddressed. Manufactured urgency is social. It depends on your belief in it. And the moment you stop believing in it, the moment you simply say, internally, I will decide on my own timeline, not yours, it dissolves entirely. Practice this: when pressure suddenly accelerates, when you feel a push toward fast commitment, do not comply and do not resist dramatically. Simply decelerate. Ask a question. Request something in writing. Say you need to review it. Any action that adds time adds clarity. Those who control time, control the game. Principle 6. Build alliances through shared interest, not shared feeling. Here is one of the most practically misunderstood principles in all of Machiavellian thought, and the one that, once corrected, changes the landscape of every important relationship in your life. Most people build alliances through emotional resonance. They trust those who feel like them, think like them, claim to want the same things. They mistake emotional familiarity for structural alignment. Machiavelli observed, across his years of watching Italian politics tear itself apart, that alliances built on feeling are the most unstable alliances possible, because feeling changes with circumstance. The prince who rules through love alone will be abandoned the moment love costs something. Feeling does not survive a change in conditions. But shared structural interest is different. Two people whose positions are genuinely strengthened by cooperation, regardless of personal feeling, will remain aligned far longer and far more reliably than those whose only bond is affection. This does not mean operate without feeling. It means do not let feeling substitute for structural analysis. When you are being played against, one of the most effective countermoves is identifying who in your environment has a genuine structural interest in your success, not those who feel warmly toward you, but those whose position is actually improved by your strength. These are your true allies. Not the ones who say the most encouraging things. Not the ones you feel the most comfortable around. The ones whose interests structurally align with yours. Conversely, Machiavelli's analysis should make you quietly cautious of those whose position is improved by your confusion, your dependence, or your failure, regardless of how warmly they speak to you. The lion and the fox operating together, strength and intelligence, are almost impossible to overcome. But the lion who trusts the wrong fox is the easiest prey of all. Audit your relationships not through the lens of feeling but through the lens of structural alignment. Who genuinely needs you to be strong? Who genuinely benefits from your clarity? Who has every reason for things to go well for you? Those are your people. Move toward them. Build with intention, not just with warmth. Principle 7. Become the origin point. Stop being the respondent. This is the principle Machiavelli circles throughout all his writing, in The Prince, in the discourses, in his letters from exile, and it may be the most important thing he ever understood about power. There are two positions in any game: the origin point and the respondent. The origin point sets conditions. The respondent reacts to conditions. The origin point decides the terms. The respondent negotiates within terms already defined. The origin point shapes the environment. The respondent adapts to the environment. Almost everything in Machiavellian strategy is oriented toward one fundamental goal, moving from respondent to origin point. And most of the techniques dirty players use against you are designed to keep you firmly in the respondent position. They create situations you must react to. They set narratives you feel compelled to correct. They establish interpretations of you that you feel the urgent need to defend against. Every one of these moves keeps you in their frame, reacting to their initiatives on their timeline. Machiavelli studied the great founders of history, Romulus, Cyrus, Moses, and what distinguished them was not their military force or their persuasive power. It was that they created the conditions in which others moved in response to them. They did not ask permission. They did not seek validation. They created facts on the ground and allowed the world to adjust. This principle, applied to your life right now, means this: stop spending energy correcting other people's narratives about you. Consistent action over time rewrites narrative far more powerfully than any defense. Stop trying to win arguments inside frames you did not create. Shift the frame. Ask the question that changes what is being measured. Stop waiting for the right moment to assert your position. Create the conditions in which your position becomes obvious. When you become the origin point, when your presence sets the conditions rather than responds to them, the entire dynamic around you changes. Not through dominance. Not through aggression. Through the quiet authority of someone who has decided where they stand and moves from that center outward. Machiavelli's final lesson is not about tactics. It is about identity. The person who knows who they are, what they are building, and where they're going cannot ultimately be displaced by those who only know how to react. Become the origin point. And watch how differently the world moves around you. Machiavelli died in 1527, largely unappreciated, his most important work banned by the church, his career never fully restored. But here is what they did not take from him: the clarity. The extraordinary, unflinching clarity of a man who had watched empires rise and fall, who had sat across from the most dangerous people of his era, who had been betrayed and imprisoned and exiled, and who never once stopped seeing clearly. That is the inheritance he left. Not a manual for cruelty. A manual for sight. You have now been given 7 principles that most people will never carry. The architecture beneath the performance. The weapon of silence. The discipline of necessità. Seeing what is, not what ought to be. The interior fortress that no external force can breach. The mastery of time and the refusal to be rushed. The intelligence to build alliances through interest rather than feeling. And the decision, the absolute, quiet decision, to become the origin point of your own life. These are not tricks. They are not hacks. They are the deep grammar of how power actually moves through the world. You will not use them to harm anyone. You will use them to stop being harmed. You will use them to move through hostile environments with the quiet precision of someone who sees the board rather than just the pieces. You will use them to stop bleeding energy where it is being harvested and start directing it toward what you are building. Because here is the truth Machiavelli spent his entire life pointing toward. The most dangerous thing to those who play dirty is someone who can no longer be manipulated into reaction. Someone who has built a life from the inside out. Someone who sees clearly, moves quietly, and cannot be reached emotionally by those who rely on your confusion. When you become that person, the game changes. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a prince who has learned to master fortune rather than be mastered by it. You do not rise by proving. You rise by positioning. And once you understand that, truly understand it, you are no longer playing the same game as everyone else. You are writing the rules. If this video reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to see the board. Subscribe if you want to continue thinking at this level. I will see you in the next one.